think I can. Let me just check. Yeah, I'm recording. Everything seems to be. Okay, on my end. So, are you good to go, Warren? Or
The line is fine.
Okay, excellent. So, how are you?
I'm good. Very
Good.
good.
Good. When was I there? In November, yeah? So you've had a busy time since, or not so much?
Well, I've had a bit of gout,
Ah,
and
sorry.
not too bad, but at the same time, it's one of these things that's chronic and annoying.
I see. But
it's I've got good treatment and a good doctor, and so it's quite fine.
Okay, good. All right. So I must say that I've spent the last few months, as I said, immersed in
Yes.
a lot of your stuff, and as you see, I have managed to find also some interesting new documents and
Yeah, absolutely.
and the rest of it. So it's going on quite well. The
Good.
project. So I think. For me, right now the focus, I'll tell you how I structure my own work. So I think I'll spend the next few weeks still immersed in early work on family therapy, psychiatry, and the blind children. And then I will shift a bit more to what you were doing at MIT and then at the lab and at the farm and eventually in Norway. So maybe today and possibly tomorrow we can discuss some of that early work. And we did not really talk much about it in our previous videos. So I think it would be also a good way to catch up. Let me just check. Okay. So
let me interrupt once.
Sure.
Tomorrow I will be at my son's place in Stockholm.
Okay. Well, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. Maybe we'll manage to.
No. I'll give you the number at his place.
Okay.
It's 46 for Stockholm.
Yes.
702972233.
Okay. So it's 467029722233.
Right.
Okay. By the way, I have a very funny anecdote to tell you. So after I stayed with you, I went to Oslo, and I had this literary festival. So I gave a talk, and there were a lot of writers, very young writers, fiction writers, novelists, and after my talk, I was chatting to 2 or 3 young Norwegian female novelists. And
good.
I started describing you and, why I was in Norway and Sweden and what brings me here. And, I tell them your story. And then it turns out that one of those women went on a date with your son, Ivan, 3 times. So she was somewhat familiar with the Brody family. So I found it quite interesting.
Good.
So good. So I wanted to start maybe by I have some factual questions which you might help me with, but I also have some more kind of historical and intellectual ones. So maybe I'll start with the factual ones now, and it will make it easier. So one of your first jobs in that hospital in Massachusetts, I think it was Worcester, right?
Worcester State Hospital.
Yeah. You, in one of the interviews...
No, it was a child guidance clinic in Worcester.
But there you were working with some more prominent psychiatrist or a doctor who took an interest in you, or not really? Because in one of the interviews you mentioned that there was somebody there who took a liking to your approach but you never mentioned his name. So I was wondering if you might be able to remember who that person was.
Oh, I,
That was somebody who you mentioned, I think, that in your long interview for the Murray Bowen project, and then you mentioned that it was somebody who wasn't very keen on hospitalization, and you kind of clicked with that person because you also were not very fond of over hospitalizing.
that's part of it. I don't think I'm trying to think of his name, but it will come to me, or I can get it one way or another. I've got these earphones on. Maybe I'll take it without the earphones, because the earphones are loud and funny sound. Let's try it without it. Okay. Continue.
Sure.
Yeah. He was a very nice fellow, and my training was such that he was happy to have me come. I had been working at the Judge Baker Child Guidance Clinic, and there I did quite well. People liked what I did, and I saw children there, and I guess I stayed there for a year or two. So I had the background. There was a training also going on at this child guidance clinic, and that was the Judge Baker Child Guidance Clinic.
Sure. So one of your first
Boston.
Yes.
Am I reaching you?
Yes, you are.
Oh, wait a minute. No, that's my problem. Okay, now.
No, I can hear you fine. So that was also where you co-wrote one of your first articles on intra-team relations, right? Was it based on those experiences or on your experiences in Washington? The article that you co-wrote with Marjorie, I forget her name. You published an article on intra-team relations and how, there seems to be also some kind of a relationship between the doctor and the social worker.
Yeah, well, that's where that I wrote in Worcester Child Guidance.
Okay.
And it was interesting because we noticed that the therapists as a group, when there were three people looking after the child, the mother and the father, and that's where I was interested in seeing, or I began to see the relationship of the family being duplicated or imitated by the relationships of the therapist, because I was supervising the therapist.
And
so that was something new that nobody had noticed before.
And what I find so interesting in your early articles is that you managed to combine, your background in psychoanalysis, right? Just a second. Just give me a second, okay, Warren? Just give me a second. I need to open the door.
And I have to try and reduce this sound somehow. Oh, it's better.
Yes, so I'm back. Sorry, I forgot to take my keys out of the door. So what I find so interesting about some of the early articles of yours is that there is clearly already some fascination with treating the family as a unit. So you clearly take on this new approach of family therapy. But there are still quite a lot of elements that derive from your psychoanalytic training as well.
Yeah.
And I was just curious how you yourself see the ways in which your training in psychoanalysis actually, rather than impeding you from becoming a good family therapist, actually helped you, and especially at the conceptual level. So, to what extent do you think something like your notion of externalization was enabled by your training in psychoanalysis, but also to what extent your training in psychoanalysis allowed you to see things in cybernetics and its application to family therapy that people who are not trained in psychoanalysis would not be able to necessarily make use of. Does it make sense, this question?
Yeah, that it was something that the psychoanalytic training gave me a sense of thinking about the family, and because I was in the psychoanalytic training, I was sort of trying to explore what my family was about and try to understand it. Mm-hmm. And so then when I began to understand it a little bit, I began to think in terms of a family. And when I was with people, with the patients and clients and all of that, but when in my training also with Dr. Malamud and the psychoanalyst was in training from the beginning in terms of psychotherapy. And so they were people who, one of my people who was supervisor was a psychoanalyst, the other one is an ordinary therapist who was very extraordinary in a way. And there was two, and there was a third, but I don't remember. So I had this background, which included psychoanalysis, and then I was also under psychoanalysis myself, which had been difficult to say the least, because the first therapist I had was really I didn't get along with that therapist. And he was kind of dumb in many ways. He was a little bit too psychoanalytic and not normal enough. Oh, I don't like the word normal, but he wasn't really able to see the things outside of psychoanalysis. So anyway, he and I didn't get along, and he was also had worked with children, but that didn't seem to make any difference. Uh-huh. So, and then I had it didn't work, and so I got another one, a woman who was a beautiful woman, and she helped me a great deal. Unfortunately, she died, but after we'd worked for a long time. Uh-huh. And then back, somebody who wasn't very good.
Uh-huh. And when you started working with Murray Bowen in Bethesda, were you the only one with some background in psychoanalytic training, or did other doctors there have some psychoanalytic training as well? Because Murray Bowen was primarily a psychiatrist, right? He was not trained as a psychoanalyst.
No, not at all. And I think Malamud was not psychoanalyst either. Not psychoanalyst. Mm-hmm. Hadn't psychoanalytic training. I mean, not Malamud. The man who was the headmaster, the head teacher there, whose name I can't think of. Mm-hmm. So he didn't have psychoanalytic training, but I did. So, but you know, the psychoanalytic training, I didn't. Well, you know, when I had this. Talked about externalization, and Anna Freud was so kind to me, yes, saying good things. So that was that helped a lot, and it sort of I had a psychoanalytic way of thinking, but I also had my own way of thinking, which is not psychoanalytic particularly. I took the psychoanalytic way of thinking as with a grain of salt. I was not. I wasn't stuck with the theory at all. It just sort of, it seemed useful, and I liked it, and I followed it. But at the same time, I wasn't really.
Sure. No. Warren, that is perfectly clear also from your, subsequent work, and you clearly kind of almost abandoned the psychoanalytic side to your work, and you kind of almost explicitly renounce it. But still, I think in terms of how you formulate ideas in the 1950s, especially in late 1950s, there are clearly a lot of psychoanalytic concepts like object relations, for example, that your idea of the image relations versus object relations. That's clearly much more influenced by psychoanalysis than by psychotherapy or family therapy. Correct?
That's true. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I wasn't somebody who was stuck with anything. I was more using what I learned.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't really. I had psychoanalytic training, and I used that, and I used what the teachers had taught me. And even in my training, these two men, Malamud and the other man was a psychoanalyst, they both worked together, and they would have sessions with me as teaching sessions with me, which they both were talking on with me, and there was the three of us who were sort of working together at things. So I wasn't really exposed to this extreme psychoanalytic dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I took it all sort of as something to think about and think with.
Sure. Can you spell that other person's name, that other psychoanalyst, that other doctor, Malamud, and then you mentioned the other name? Can you spell it?
No, the other name, I think the other name, I don't remember his name.
Okay, I just thought you had just mentioned it, but maybe it was my...
No, I think I slipped on that one. I mentioned psychoanalyst, and it wasn't true.
Uh-huh.
So it just popped in my head.
Okay.
I think in the journals, you'll find some of these details.
Sure. That's still something I have to look through a bit more carefully. But I just wanted to ask you about some concepts also that seem to be quite important to you, that seem to derive from psychoanalytic milieu. So you talk a lot, both at that time and also in the 60s, when you even start working on technology, talk about this idea of impingement, which also seems to derive primarily from psychoanalysis. That, people impinge upon each other, and that there are families impinging upon family members. And this idea of impingement seems to be quite important to you because you still talk about it by, early 1970s. Is there anything that you think I should know about how you view this impingement? Because clearly it's something that a lot of psychoanalysts talk about as well in more, specific terms, right? So it's a psychoanalytic term, impingement.
Impingement?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't really ring any bells.
Uh-huh. Okay. And the other term that you seem to use also, which might somehow be overlapping with impingement, is entwinement.
Say it again.
Entwinement.
Well, entwinement is this was sort of accepting the fact there are many threads that go between people, and these are woven together, and the idea of everything influencing everything starts very early. So I sort of build out from this single-mindedness. And I'm thinking in terms of the wholeness from the beginning. It's I had to sort of accept some of it, but because that was the language that was used.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I was thinking more about things being they impinge on each other, they entwine with each other, uh, they are not separate. So this idea of psychological work is work with complexity.
Mm-hmm.
That comes much later, the words, but
Sure.
right from the beginning, I'm thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm surprised myself that so many of the concepts I've had in later years really have had right along, but they didn't get names, and they are because to me now when I talk to people, it's sort of this tangle of many things,
Yeah.
which I call this fat kind of way of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
rather than single-mindedness.
Sure. Well, I mean, impeachment, for example, you discuss when you discuss how, internal and external realities impinge upon each other and the way in which, that impingement might trigger, psychosis at some point or not. So, I mean, but what I found so interesting is that it might just be coincidences that in that film that I left you last time I came, where you speak for 3 hours to uh, filmmakers, you also use that term of impeachment and impinging, and it was kind of very interesting. But let me ask you a more abstract question. So, in
Yeah.
reading those early papers, it seems, I mean, there are two ways to make sense of them, and particularly the relationship to cybernetics and communications, theory more broadly. One hypothesis one can make, is that you were working in family therapy and to some extent psychoanalysis, and you gradually discover that people in cybernetics pose questions that are very similar to yours, and their methods are very similar to yours to some extent, and the explanatory mechanisms that they have of how change happens are also very similar to how you think about how change happens in families, for example. So that might be one hypothesis about how you become fascinated with cybernetics. But there might be also another hypothesis, which is to say that, by early 1950s, sort of work of people like Gregory Bateson and that entire group in Palo Alto, the idea that family therapy has this communicative cybernetic element is already firmly established. And it seems that by the time you started writing, you're already quoting a lot of Bateson and Ruesh's papers and books. So I'm just trying to understand whether you will, whether you already acquired this focus on communication and change and cybernetics because it was already inherent, so to say, to family therapy, or whether you just discovered cybernetics because the tools you discovered and worked with independently and autonomously just happen to be more or less quite familiar to what cyberneticists were developing. Does it make sense, this question?
Yeah, it makes question is whether my connection with the cybernetic people came first, and I think the answer is no. I didn't know those people.
Mm. But not necessarily the people, but the modes of thinking, because you do reference Bateson's work already in 57, 58, 56.
Okay.
But it might just have been quite unconscious and without necessarily any theoretical implications of it. I'm just saying that there seems to be, even in how you talk about, externalization, how you talk about communication between, family. I mean, there are a lot of ideas which might not be necessarily, naming as homeostasis or something like that, but the mode of thinking seems to be quite cybernetic in general. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that's just already inherent to how things are explained in family therapy and psychotherapy and maybe even psychoanalysis, or whether it's something that is really specific to a particular series of books and events and literature that's up in the air.
That's hard because I think that when I was the beginning of child psychiatry, I was sort of fascinated by some of the ideas of cybernetics, but I wasn't really. I don't think I can answer the question really, honestly, because these influences came relatively early because I was, I think my relation to Bateson came quite early, and I was thinking about these things, and so eventually, then of course I got closer to Bateson, but I was reading a lot, and I was thinking a lot about how do I make sense out of these things that are happening, and then. But I couldn't really tell you which came first. It's sort of chicken or the egg, but it's sort of. I think when I was at the Judge Baker, and I think I was relatively naive.
Yes.
And by the time I got to Worcester, I was starting to rummage around and feel that there were other people who were writing things that were important, and they were already sort of people who were respected. A lot of other things that you ordinarily read in psychiatry, some was interesting, some not, but it didn't have the dynamic qualities that were necessary in order to really, for me to catch on. To it. I was exposed to so much from various places, but I really got sort of attached because I liked the dynamic attitudes and not it was alive to me. And these people became sort of heroes to me, but they were sort of heroes at a distance. Gradually, I sort of got closer to them, and and there was Edward T. Hall also was close, and it's very hard to. I just think it sort of came.
Sure. No, that's fine. We can. I mean, it's a big question, so it's not. It does not have a definitive answer. But I also wanted to ask you. So, would it be correct to say that one of the kind of major insights that you got while working with these families, while you were working with Murray Bowen, and particularly when you were writing your paper on schizophrenia, that one of your major insights was that you have to see it as a process, rather than just a collection of symptoms. And that once you start seeing it as a process, then the kinds of interventions that one needs to make will be of a very different kind than you would to schizophrenia conceived as just, a bunch of symptoms. So this focus on process, is it also something that opened you up to, I don't know, new types of interventions that would be very different from the traditional ones that were practiced before family therapy and before systems family therapy?
Well, I would say, first of all, that what went on in the when I went in my training to get, I guess, 3 months. I think it was 3, maybe less, but almost 3 months of training at the Worcester the place for psychosis, the hospital. And I got there and I was furious because it was pathetic. I called it a jail immediately. And I got in trouble with the director because I wouldn't do shock therapy. At least then he said, well, you can leave. Can't do talk therapy. And I didn't argue with him too much about my vision of what was going on. It was just criminal. And I would happily leave, except that it seemed wrong for me to leave from this experience. And I don't know. I guess I'd been more honest with Jay. I was wasn't strong enough to leave because it was a part of my training. That was 3 years of training at the Massachusetts the main hospital, one of the main hospitals in Boston, Massachusetts. Anyway, so the training of the whole training as a psychiatrist, I had to go through this with the psychotic people. And so I just felt that should continue. And so then I sat there and pressed the button, and the person had seizures and all. And I sang a little bit aloud, for I am the Lord High Executioner. And that's how I felt. You know, it was criminal. The young people were being put through this extreme treatment of the brain. It's shock treatment is something terrible to my mind. There are places where shock treatment is correct, but that's people who are depressed and old and so on and so forth. But anyway, so in my training, it was a 3-year training program in psychiatry. It included these Therap Malamud and the other guy and the psychoanalyst and the third person. And then it was divided into so many months in one thing, one in Chagai, one thing was not Chagai, with children, one with sick patients on the ward who had ordinary sickness like pneumonia and such. And then it had a time in psychiatry, which was, I think it was quite a long time in psychiatry, a fairly long time in each one of them. So I was getting training in all of these things as a part of my medical training. And I chose to do it. It's part of the whole training as medicine. It wasn't training in psychiatry. was training in medicine, and then I worked on did surgery too,
Right.
and so that was my medical training as a doctor, and that was very unique, and I was very fortunate to find that place to get my training. So, and that sort of started me on the road of deciding what I wanted to do: be a psychiatrist, be a surgeon, be a medical doctor, and be a gynecologist, because I also did births too.
Mm-hmm.
So then I had chosen this training in medicine. So when I finished medical school, then I went to this place to get this broader training. And the medical school was in Toronto, Toronto School of Medicine. Anyway, so I'm getting this very broad training from people from a very, very broad experience. And I was very happy with it. So I'd gone from Toronto, which is a very conservative place, the hospital there, and I was fortunate to get into the University of Toronto because I was Jewish, which was, there were very few Jewish people who were allowed into the medical, they had too many Jews, they said. Mm-hmm. So this was also a political affair. So then I got this training in Massachusetts, a specialized training, and so then I get this very broad training, and then I have to decide what do I want to be my specialty. And then I decided I would be a psychiatrist, because as a surgeon I wouldn't make it at all, because I don't have that good memory and the details, and I don't have that capacity for small details that you have to have for being a surgeon. So it was a very fascinating kind of experience I had. And the people who were doing the training were very fine people. Massachusetts Memorial Hospital, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And the war was sort of going about this time, and there were problems, as I recall anyway. There were problems having to do with, how do you think about people who don't want to shoot and things like that,
Sure.
And I was supposed to be in, be a part of the military, and I refused, etc., etc. I refused in my own way, because you can't refuse to be drafted. So I negotiated that. That's how I got to NIH.
Mm-hmm. But let's talk a bit more about this period at NIH, because I think it's also very interesting. Your relationship with Murray Cowan, what is it that you learned from him? What is it that you learned from you? That would be very good to know, and also the way in which, as I said, this focus on process, right? This focus on intervening somehow in that process as opposed to searching for causes. It seems to be a very big theme for you and also for him at the time. So maybe you can talk a bit more about that.
Well, I've been reading that the piece that you sent me,
Mm-hmm.
which where I'm talking in
in the conference.
Yeah. I'm being very direct and saying what I think at that, and that was, very difficult because people didn't do that in those days. But anyway. So, and Murray's way of thinking really was a great teaching, because his way of dealing with things and choosing the setting that he wanted, and choosing, to talk about the family as a creature rather than the family as an assembly of people. I think I summed it up best by saying, you can talk about the fingers, but if you want to talk about the fingers, that's fine. But if you want to understand about the fingers, you also have to understand about the hand. And I even, that's one of the things I spent time and feeling about with Murray, because he really didn't exactly have that sense, but at the same time he did, because he had taken the families in, and even so was in some ways talking about the individuals, but at the same time he was talking about the family as a unit, and I respected that very much. And he was, in a sense, was very, he chose what he wanted to do and what he wanted to be, and what section of humanity he wanted to handle with. And, he had people that on the unit who were, everybody was in the whole hospital were angry about. And two people essentially who were mother and a daughter, and they were so attached to each other that it was, they were completely bonded to each other. And it was really quite crazy. But he also, the families, there was a variety of families, not so many. And, but he managed to hold out, to follow his own thinking and not be pushed by the hospital people, the director of the hospital, the director of the psychiatric units. And he managed to hold his own, even though at the end they were so angry about him that they told him to leave, and they didn't have any quality, any base for that, so he didn't leave. And then eventually they cut his office in half and then in a quarter, and then they painted the office to get him out. So they didn't understand that we had another way of thinking completely than the hospital did or that psychiatry did. So that was fine, because it was the interaction of a family was, you choose the unit. I think of the earth as, many different kinds of beings. A forest is a being, a tree is a being, and then the forest and all of the plants together in a particular forest are a being too. And then you sort of choose what being you want to consider. You can talk about the beings of microbes and of whatever, anything. And then you choose to talk about it and be aware that you're talking about something in the midst of a milieu and many creatures. But you can't talk about them all at once, so you choose the creatures that you sort of decide should be, that you want to think about, because you can't think about it all, get anywhere, except in your intuition, you can think in this very broad way.
Sure. But what about, so let me then ask the following question. So what about the relationships or collaborations, or I don't know, conflicts that existed between what you were doing at NIH with Murray and some other groups that were beginning to work in family therapy? I'm not just talking about, Don Jackson or Jay Haley, but also Nathan Ackerman, who seemed to be, I don't know, you seem to have some conflicting feelings about him from what I can judge, having read a lot of things.
Well, I disliked him
Uh-huh.
because he was a New York therapist and had his practice, and he was so sure of himself and he was essentially was not doing family therapy to my mind at all, because he was doing therapy of individuals, and he was doing the fingers, not really getting involved with the hand, how they work together. That he was his unit of interest was, here's the mother and the wife and the husband and a youngster or whatever, and he would talk to each one of them separately, and then I guess discuss a certain amount with each. I don't know about the other. I don't know exactly how he did it. And I told him about my method, or our method of therapy, Bowen's and all of that. He just became furious. And he said, that's not anything. That's what I say, It's forbidden to think of something new. He was one of those who was forbidding. And if he was doing some evaluation where he had power over me, I would be in soup. He would make trouble for me. But essentially, he didn't have any power over me because we just had to do with each other because we were sharing a conference or something of that sort.
Yes, I think you mentioned that conference in your letter to Jay Haley. Actually, you have a letter that you wrote to him in late 60s. It's a somewhat strange letter because in that letter you're asking him whether he thinks it's worth republishing a paper. The second part, which seems to be a second part of a longer paper you've written based on your experiences with the family study unit, which was much more psychoanalytic in output, but you never published it. And do you remember anything about that paper? And you seem to be very concerned about it, even 7 years after you've written it, that it was never published and you never took the time to publish it. It was kind of your goodbye present to your psychoanalytic colleagues.
It was.
Well, you write to Jay Haley that it was something of a departing goodbye present to your psychoanalytic colleagues, that was your departure. That paper marked your departure from the psychoanalytic milieu.
Yeah.
Because, I found in your, let me say what I have in mind. So when I first came to see you in 2014, there was a paper which you have showed me, which was unpublished. It was very, very long, and it was similar to a paper on narcissism, but it was also a bit different. So it was a paper that was written in the psychoanalytic language, so very little family therapy in it. It was very long, and I don't think it was ever published, and I don't think it's in your Vienna archives. So I thought maybe it was that paper that you had in mind. And I find it interesting because in that paper, you already start speaking about sensory deprivation as a possible consequence of conflicts in the family. But you explain it through, again, appealing to externalization and all of these other concepts. And it seemed to me very interesting because it seemed to me that your interest in sensory deprivation primarily emerged mostly after you started working with the blind children, right? Or you had some overlap where you were working on both the blind and still were doing work at NIH? Or...
Well, at NIH, there was a unit doing sensory deprivation. Mm-hmm. They had a tank.
No, but you're not talking about the tank. You're talking about something else in that paper. You're talking about, I'm just trying to find, I made some notes yesterday, so I'm trying to see if I will find it. In that paper, you're talking about ways in which, this, if I remember correctly, this narcissistic feelings in one way or another, they reinforce externalization and that then blocks certain ways of perceiving reality. So you're not really talking about sensory deprivation in a technical sense. You're talking about it in an actual blocking and I don't know, a certain retardation maybe of sensory capacities in individuals who are trapped in those families.
Well, let me check. There was that paper that I sent to Anna Freud. But that's not what you're talking about.
Well, possibly it's that one. I mean, the thing is that I don't think it was ever published.
If you hold a minute, narcissist, this externalization. Just 1 minute. It should be somewhere. I had it.
Yes, I found it.
The narcissism.
Well, the one that I refer to is called the pathogenesis of schizophrenia. Narcissistic relationship, externalization, and the image mode of reality testing.
Well, I think that's the one I sent in to.
But the thing is that you have two different papers. I mean, they start a little bit alike, and they overlap a little bit, and both you quote Milton, you quote a little bit of Freud on narcissism, but they're two different papers. And in this particular paper, which I refer to, you actually do talk about sensory deprivation, which I find very interesting because of the timing. But it's also hard to say because the paper has the date of 1963 on it, which is already when you're working with the blind children. But in the paper itself, you say that it was written during your work at NIH.
Do you have a copy of it?
I have an electronic copy of it, yes. And it was in your files, but I don't think you gave those files to, at least it's not listed amongst the documents in the Vienna archives, and I didn't see it there.
Well, maybe. Could you send it to me?
Yeah, it's a very big file, so I will send you a link, and I will send it also to Karen in case you have some time downloading it. But so I see the section now on sensory deprivation, and yeah, I mean, you quote somebody called Gardner, a paper called Conceptual Model of Schizophrenia, and then you go on talking about how various, let me see, how narcissism might block the formation of various percepts. I just found it very interesting, but also the idea that you would already be talking about sensory deprivation. Because essentially, I think this is more or less what you eventually get at in your paper about what the blind children, what lessons they have for the gifted. Once you start talking about sensory, once you start talking about secondary retardation. I think. But anyway, that's something to investigate. But I will send you a link to that. Paper.
Yeah, if you could, if it's so long, maybe you can put it in, make it into two pieces or something.
No, it's not. I will. I have it online, so I'll just send the link, and you will just have to download it. Not a big problem. So I just want to ask one more question on family therapy, and then a few questions on the blind. So apparently there is another series of letters of yours in the archives of the Edith Jacobson. Do you remember much about her? This background?
What again? The name is
Edith Jacobson. Jacobson. I don't know how you pronounce it. She was a German psychoanalyst who was working mostly on psychosis and depression. Edith Jacobson or Jacobson.
Jacobson, and as Edith.
Yeah.
Spell it.
Edith. Edith.
Edith, yeah. Edith. Yeah, Jacobson. No, I don't really remember writing, but sometimes I read something and I just had to write back.
And in the other papers, you seem to be quoting a lot Heinz Hartmann, who was working with Anna Freud a lot on ego psychology. Any recollection of him? Heinz Hartmann.
What's the first? Hartmann, I understand, but the first name?
Heinz. Heinz. Yeah.
Hartmann, yeah. No, I have no memory.
Okay. So, fine. I just wanted then to ask some factual questions about the blind project and what you're doing there. So, you met Eleanor Rink while you were at the Washington School of Psychiatry, or how did that connection come about?
I'm having some difficulty with sound, yeah.
Okay, so let me repeat that.
Sorry, I just adjusted it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was asking if you met Eleanor Rink, that woman who was leading the pilot school for the blind, if you met her while you were at the Washington School of Psychiatry. Where did you meet her exactly?
Yes, I think so. Well, I was at the Washington School of Psychiatry.
But she was there as a visitor, and you just...
No, I had been working with a group of blind adults. I think that came first. Because I was interested in perception. And then somehow or another, in the process, let's see, who... You ask she came to me sort of because she was looking for somebody to ally herself with in order to start the pilot school for the blind. Or maybe she started it already. And she wanted somebody who could help her, and a medical doctor would be very good. And she heard of me. And so we immediately got to be very good friends right away, because she had this group of children who were having a very hard time because she had gathered them together because they were all related to the problem of being damaged by incubation. That is,
oxygen.
Incubators. It's okay.
But let me just ask a very specific question. So, Washington School of Psychiatry, it was like some kind of a private practice where you had some kind of a
That's right.
part-time appointment?
It was a private practice of family therapy,
But
primarily, and some psychoanalysis too.
so this is where you saw your patients, private patients, you saw it there, and it was just several people like you in a building, and the building was known
Yeah.
as the Washington School of Psychiatry, more or less.
Yeah, right.
So it was more or less a number of practicing psychiatrists, not necessarily affiliated with each other, who just occupied a shared space, well, with offices. And
The shared space, and there wasn't so much aside from that, as I recall, and well, we kind of liked each other.
And at the same time, you were also teaching at Georgetown. That was
That's right.
isolated from, so there was no connection with Washington School of Psychiatry and Georgetown. It was just an
Not really.
appointment you had.
No, and actually, Georgetown University I was related to in terms of Murray was there.
Yeah,
Murray,
you went there immediately
but
after.
there was also at Georgetown, there was something else going on. I think I had a class at Georgetown, and so I saw young people there who were going to Georgetown and were interested in let's see. They were sort of, I think, I got into difficulty in the sense that I didn't agree with the sort of the line of the person who was in charge of that. And because I was critical of psychiatry, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the students didn't think I had a base for saying what I did. In other words, the students themselves were upset with me because they felt that I wasn't basing what I said on facts. That they wanted to have it all sort of be like a regular class with proper facts and proper organization, and I was following my own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't exactly what they wanted. So they didn't like the class, which is their privilege too.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, if some people don't like the way I think, or they don't like me to put so much value in what I think, you know?
Sure. But it was at the Washington School of Psychiatry that you also met Edward P. Hall, right? Because he had also an office there. Or
Yeah.
so it must have been, I mean, there must have been something else going on there because he wasn't really a psychiatrist, right? So was there some academic component to Washington School of Psychiatry as well?
He was not involved with psychiatry. He was involved with perception.
Sure. But what we were just discussing 10 minutes ago is that my understanding was that it was mostly practicing psychiatrists just having...
It was mostly practicing psychiatry, yeah.
But he had... What kind of appointment did he have there?
You just rent.
He paid his bills. I mean, he was there on his own, or like he got a salary of some kind while he was there. Or it was just some kind of a quasi-academic appointment where he just hanged out and studied things.
Well, Edward T. Hall was there. He was an anthropologist, as I recall.
Oh.
And so he was there, and I got to talking with him as a friend, and then we found ourselves both involved in similar things.
Sure. No, that I know. We discussed it many times. I'm just trying to understand something about the culture and the overall kind of, vibes of the Washington School of Psychiatry. It just seems a bit strange that an anthropologist would have an office inside something called Washington School of Psychiatry if he wasn't seeing any patients. That just, as an observer, I'm just saying it looks a bit odd. I know exactly what he was doing. He was writing the silent language book there, and he was doing a lot of interesting things. It just seems to be a very strange perch to occupy for an anthropologist.
No, because he needed a space, and there was a space which was available. That's all. And he must have liked somehow or another the place and the people, and I think I stumbled into his office more or less. And then we started chatting, and then we found we developed a very close relationship.
I see. Okay, so a couple of more questions. So yeah. I have actually read most of the reports written by the people who participated in your perceptual study group. But before I get to them, let's just get the factual details right. So you are in Washington at the time, at Washington School of Psychiatry. You're doing something at Georgetown. You get involved with the pilot school project, where I suppose you become a consultant of some kind, and you draw some payment from them, where you work mostly with the kids who have problems, developmental problems, right? So they are not, they are blind, but they also have other difficulties, right?
Yeah, they would be in many ways just thrown in the garbage because they could be called autistic, they could be called brain damaged, and severely brain damaged, and they could be called all sorts of things, but they were, a little bit like animals. So, and at the beginning, the group that Eleanor brought had gathered, I will say, had one thing in common, which is, of course, that they were. The problem was the result of the incubation with having too much oxygen.
Yes.
And so they were blind, and parents who didn't have any capacity to deal with this. That was the other part. Well, nobody talked exactly about that to the parents because it wouldn't help anything. And so
but let me just get to the sort of timeline. So, but in addition to this pilot school, you also set up your own perceptual study group, which is completely independent from the pilot school.
Absolutely.
Does it happen after you already work with the pilot school or before the setup of the perceptual study group?
I think it would be after.
And in your interviews, you also mentioned that you worked with also other types of people, not just the blind. So at some point you mentioned the people with near-death experiences. And at some point, I think you even mentioned people who have been sighting UFOs. Or you were helping the U.S. government or some government group.
UFOs, and I was trying to understand. The only way to understand this thing was to talk to people who had sighted them. and read a good deal as I did, and gathered these people together who had had themselves sighted UFOs, had experiences with it. This was their statement. And then I had also the Genius Children's Group.
Yes, but the Genius Children's Group was also that was not. So you had Perceptual Study Group with the very smart but blind people who managed to navigate the city, and they had some skills you wanted to understand. But you also had High IQ Group, right, which was also something you set up, and you met with them regularly, and that was outside of the pilot school, right?
Wait a minute. Say that again. I'm having trouble with the sound.
Okay, so the High IQ Group, yes? So
Yeah.
this group, that was independent from the Perceptual Study Group of
Quite
blind
independent.
kids, and it was independent also from the pilot school for the blind. Right?
Entirely independent.
Um,
Because I'd written this paper about people who were gifted, could be
Yes.
trained, could be helping other people instead of, that their skill and perception could be transferred to other people.
But how long did that group of high IQ kids continue? I mean, that was not
The kids
as your Perceptual Study Group, or you also met with them for several years?
didn't last so long, no.
Uh-huh.
And I paid them a little bit to come. And the parents were willing, actually.
Okay.
So-
But then I have the following question. So with this Perceptual Study Group and the people who you were, this blind kids who had extra capacities and capabilities, you said that you were paying them out of your own pocket, right?
Yeah.
But you did not have a grant, or you did not have any
No,
institutional support.
no, not so, not at all.
And your associate who was working with you, Martin Bishard, how did you meet him?
Actually, I think it was because he was skilled in working with dogs,
Uh-huh.
and dogs that would help blind people too. But Martin, I just came across his name, and I think it was that American.
Yeah, the paper I sent you, it has his name in it. Yeah, the conference. Yes.
But he was a very brilliant guy who was actually working for the CIA.
Yes.
At the time. And because these genius blind people had been recruited by the CIA in order so that they could listen to broadcasts or sneaked, what's it called? Yeah, they had microphones in rooms where people didn't know that in Russian rooms that they didn't know that the microphones were there, or maybe they did, I don't know. But anyway.
But Warren,
he was a fascinating guy, and I met him because we had a dog that, and he was sort of a dog consultant.
Yeah, I think he ran something called the Canine University.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But he participated in those sessions because he was just interested, and I mean, so there was no grant money, there was no money whatsoever.
No grant. No. I was interested. He was interested. And we became very good friends.
But he was working for some welfare agency, right?
He was working for a government agency.
And doing some consulting for this.
Doing consulting in terms of the recruiting people who could listen.
But how did you identify the kids who were in your group?
That's a good question. Let me think about it.
So there is a letter, for example, in your archives, this is what I saw 4 years ago. There is a letter you addressed to a person called Charles Ruppert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think, I looked him up online, I don't know, maybe more. I think he was in some war or something that we had, maybe not. Anyway, maybe it was a different Ruppert that I found it anyway. So you address a letter to him, but it seems that you must have known that he had some skills because you invite him to participate in this session.
Yeah.
So would it be a contact of Martin or somebody you knew, or how did all these people get on your list?
No, Martin told me about these people who had worked in a project to listen into Russian spying.
So that project was already happening before you started working with Martin?
Yeah, that had been going on. So Martin was, he was sort of a part of that project of recruiting these people. How they managed to get him, I don't know, and I didn't ask. But he knew about this group. So then, when I heard about that, then of course I said I was interested in learning about and having them come and teach me what they knew, and that was important to me because I'm involved with this human enhancement problem.
Yes.
It seemed ridiculous to me that people who were enhanced in some particular way and really quite enhanced should be teaching other people who are not enhanced. That seems just reasonable. And grants and things like that are too complicated. If you're doing something small, then you don't need
Sure. But what really so I having looked through these documents and papers, I mean, listen to the interviews, I did figure out that Martin was the person working for the CIA, kind of logically. But the kids who were writing up those reports, they actually referenced that CIA project inside the reports. So they mentioned quite specifically that, we were told that maybe our perception will be particularly strengthened for our Russian comprehension listening project. So, they actually referenced the Russian project inside the reports, which I found interesting. But the other thing is that they referenced a visit to the sessions by a woman from a foundation in New York.
Yeah, the American Foundation for the Blind.
So that was that foundation. So there was somebody who came from the foundation and sat on it. It was not a foundation that was funding it in any way or another.
No, they weren't funding anything. They just this. I knew of American Foundation for the Blind, and then I just sort of, I think, I'm not sure that I think I contacted them. And then, yes, I know. I had a meeting where I told the American Foundation for the Blind about the work I was doing with blind people or gifted blind people. And I'd also talked to the school for the blind who were given a letter or something to the school for the blind in Boston. And anyway, she heard about me, and I think that's the way it went. And she came to visit. And then I invited her to attend one of our sessions. And then, of course, at that session, these skilled blind people had to show them how it was to be skilled. And their stories were magnificent, you know. As I think I've told you, or they're written down.
Yes, no, I've read quite a lot of that. So I think I'm what they're doing. But fine. But then my last question with regards to this particular blind project. So you wrote a very long report, which was kind of a narrative summary of your 2 or 3 years of working with them. But I mean, the report was never published, as far as I know. But it just seems a bit strange that you would take the burden of writing a report of 90 pages for a project that had no institutional support, no grant funding, nothing. I mean, you could have just written some notes and leave it at that. Why did you go through the trouble of writing an entire report about it, which was then never published?
I may have been looking for money at that point.
And because you know that book that you sent also to Dark Touch, which contains all the write-ups of sessions, it also contains a very long report. And I mean, don't get me wrong, but it just seems too well organized for an ad hoc project.
I don't remember sending it to anybody particularly. I just wanted to summarize it and for myself. And I had the hope that I could move that to the School for the Blind in Boston, and they would pay attention, but I think it didn't happen. And yeah, it was just too far out for these people.
Yes.
And that was, I think they didn't pay much attention to me after all. I wasn't in the framework of what you're supposed to do. I think I was hoping to find people interested. And then I wrote the I don't yeah, I felt it needed to come together, and I don't think I got it published. I don't think it. I probably tried or something of that sort, but it was too long or too much. So I considered it something that should be taken account of, but just didn't happen.
Okay, and on the intellectual side of your work with the blind children, it seems to me that you got this idea, this notion of what you call developmental education, which you then develop in some articles later on. Is it something that registered with you as an important idea? Because there in that article about what the normal kids can get from learn from the blind ones, you also talk about relationship resonance as being very important for developmental learning, which seems to kind of almost build upon your work on family therapy and expand it a little bit, or apply it maybe to the world of the blind. And particularly because then, this idea, I'll tell you what I'm asking this, because this idea of relationship resonance seems to be kind of the beginning of your fascination with the idea of rhythms of communication and time training and all the stuff that comes much later. But it seems to me that it all starts early on, even with your experiences with families, but especially with the blind. You come up with this idea of developmental education, and you specifically highlight the importance of relationship resonance to it. Because relationship resonance, to some extent, there's also this idea that our rhythms of communication somehow need to be synchronized. No? Maybe I'm over-interpreting it.
Say more.
Well, again, I'll have to look through my notes, but that paper on just find my notes. Well, I mean, if it doesn't resonate, I mean, maybe it was not that important. You know, it's like I'm just reading a lot of your papers and trying to draw connections between them across time. But you know, it might be that these connections don't necessarily exist in your mind.
Well, they did. I wrote it. You know, it's a long time.
But you know, for me, I'll just say this, and then I'll shut up. I mean, having read some of your stuff from early 70s and late 60s, and then having read immediately after that your papers from the 50s and early 60s, I mean, I did see a very strong connection that a lot of your subsequent work, the time grading or the idea of intelligent environments, a lot of that seems to be grounded in just expanding your original insights about the dynamics within the family and society at large, but also the ways in which we seem to be trained out. You particularly use that term. We seem to be trained out of a much richer scale of sensory experiences as we age. Right, so those insights, you already arrive at them early on, and you seem to be just expanding them and making them more and more abstract, but they all start from your clinical work, more or less.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think as I look at this, my situation now, in some ways, my development has been founded in very early. And it's the same.
Sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I think a lot of the ideas I have, which I consider to be important, have a theme that goes way back. It's a little embarrassing because they're not new.
Mm-hmm.
And like now, I'm very much involved with the difference between the things which are simultaneous and those which are longitudinal.
Mm-hmm.
One cross-section, the other is longitudinal. And that how can we find some way of helping people in science to relate to the complexity that we live in and the complexity of a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't think of that. It's take one theme, one single line, and make it logically important, but it has no meat in it. Mm-hmm. The experience itself is lost. Instead, they have intellectual, sequential thinking that this follows this, follows this, follows this. Mm-hmm. But all that's happening at the same time, the thickness of this theme of that they want to see sequentially, they don't see the multiple, the many things that are happening at once and interacting with each other at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you take these two themes of the sequential and the simultaneous, then you also have to have some kind of way of talking about wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And because if I take these two, I end up in the dyadic again.
Mm-hmm.
Sequential on the things that are happening at once. So we need something that is more than that, because then you're into the old trap of dyadic thinking, which is easy to write about and to use language about, but it's very difficult to really be real. It's sort of so much bullshit that the scientists have learned over the period of time, which is very valuable, but it's still bullshit because it doesn't really, it means that you're throwing away most of life itself.
Mm-hmm.
You're ending up with finding a truth by denying all of the sentience, all of the reality of the situation.
Yes.
I mean, it's, and I say, you know, what I'm interested in is what is obvious and is there to be seen and to be known and to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
But it's abandoned by people who are trying to describe it because they don't have the language to describe the simultaneous things.
Mm-hmm.
And one has to add context to all of this.
Sure.
Because without the context, it ends up dyadic anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So now we want to get to triadic and multiadic, or whatever that's what we call it. And the computers can handle this new kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
But the scientists and the people who are knowledgeable, they are trapped in the old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of my message in many ways at this point.
Yes. So I think we're actually good. So I think I've asked you enough of the early stage. I think I will get back to work, and I think we can schedule maybe another call in 2 weeks or so, because I'm going to the US, and once I'm back, I think we might be able to discuss a bit more what happens after you move to Boston, because I will have, after you move to MIT, because I'll have more specific question filters and going through all of the archival materials and whatnot. But I had one more kind of question / request. Don't you think it might be a good idea for you to get in touch with Negroponte again and maybe mention that you now have this archive of yours set up in Vienna, and that you're trying to gather any materials from the 60s that some of your contacts might have, and see if he might have kept some letters or anything of the kind from your years and correspondence back then, but also maybe summarize very quickly what you've told me over the years, which is how you see your relationship with him, and ask if he kind of thinks it's an accurate description. Because once he responds and says, yes, I think it's accurate, this is something you can deposit in the archives, and at least that will be a statement that any researcher, me included, can use and quote and cite and use in subsequent historical work.
Yes, that could be possible. I need his address and things like that.
I think I'll find it. I think it's the same address that he had before, but I think it would also help if you don't mention me, because he doesn't really like me. So if you just say that, there are people who are now interviewing you and there are articles being written about you, which is true, and you can maybe even send him a link to that article that was published by that historian about your work with Avery Johnson on soft materials, and just see if he would be amenable to provide some statement about your early years with him. I mean, from my interviews with you, I have a lot of data points. You told me how you were, carrying him around Boston in a wheelchair with this eyes blindfolded to experience the city, and there are a couple of other anecdotes here. It would just be good to get a statement from him that you know this is also how he remembers things. Because once we have that, it's history and it can be put into circulation, so to say.
Well, let me ask this question, which is, of course, interesting to me and to you. And what sort of production are you thinking of doing someday? Writing a.
Well, I mean, I'm supposed to finish my dissertation now, which will be, I'm supposed to be done with it more or less by, if I manage, by end of May.
Good.
Which means that I have a very kind of intense calendar, and so that will be the dissertation, and then I will need to decide whether to do a separate short book based on the dissertation, or whether to integrate that dissertation into my larger project about the history of cybernetics and cyberculture, counterculture, and much else, which will be much more visible and much more readable. But it also means that in that book you will not get as much prominence, obviously, as in my dissertation. Now, my dissertation is just basically you. That's it. So I start from your psychiatric work and family therapy, and I move on to more or less the first few years of your work in Norway. So some of the papers you've written on automation of the factories and the consequences of automation, and some of the memos you've written for Professor Balkan and that stuff. So I more or less take the period between mid-1950s and mid-1970s, so 20 years of your life. And that's something that will be hopefully done soon. And I will, of course, share it with you much earlier, because I would want you to read it and give me comments before I actually submit it, because there will also be actual things that I'm sure you'll be able to correct. But yeah, that's more or less how I see things. I think if I manage to publish it as a short book, it wouldn't be difficult, but it would come out much sooner. But my hope was to also write an article for the popular audience immediately after I'm done with the dissertation, which means this summer, and to just have it out so that people know who you are and what you've done, and it becomes part of a kind of broader conversation instead of waiting until my book is actually out. And I can write a long article which will not reduce the complexity of the story, but will still be read by a lot of people. And I mean kind of a magazine article, not an academic article.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, whatever you do is fine. Yes. But that would please me to get to the popular press or whatever it may be. And I like what you write, so that's good. That's very good. Good. And I'm very grateful for your attention to this character. It's good. For me,
for me, it's also very interesting, I must say. It's, the more I study, the more I learn. So in that sense, it's a very useful exercise.
Yeah, it's very useful, and all the way around. So I'm happy with that you're taking it up.
Yes.
And I look forward to it coming out in whatever form you decide is right.
Sure.
And I will cooperate in everything you need, and I can help with. And don't be afraid of asking more than I can manage, because that's fine. I can deal with that.
Okay, so I'll try to find Negroponte's email and I'll forward it to you. See if you can establish a connection with him. Because I know for a fact that he has all his papers. He just doesn't have an archive yet, but he has all his papers stored in some garage in Massachusetts, somewhere in Cambridge. So I'm sure he kept it in the 60s and 70s, which you haven't kept. This is one thing. And second is So I will then get in touch about our next call. And as I told you, I will be in Oslo, but it might just be too much of a trip for you to make because I'll be there for a relatively short time. I get in on a Sunday afternoon, and on Monday I'm in a conference all day, and then I leave in the evening. But if you want to come Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, when I'm there, it will be great. If not, I'll try to find a way to come and see you maybe in May when I'm done with the dissertation, and you can maybe read it together or something like that.
Oh, that would be good. Now, I didn't really hear the first thing that you said. I know that's vague, but
I said that I will email you about the next Skype call or next session we can do to
that's
chat.
what I got.
And then I just said that, as I wrote to you, I will be in Oslo in
That
2
we
weeks or
can
so.
work, and you tell me exactly when you can see me, and I'll tell you whether I can get there or not.
Yes.
And then, but there was something else before that about. There was a statement before. Sometimes, when the sound isn't so perfect.
No, I understand. Well, there wasn't really anything. I mean, I said that I will give you Negroponte's email, and I said that we'll get in touch about our next call. And I mentioned Norway, and then I said that I might come back. I might come visit you when I've written the dissertation, so you can actually correct some factual mistakes.
That would be
That's
good.
all I said.
Yeah, okay. I got it. What I missed, it's all right. I've learned it. So I missed a little bit here and there, so that's what it is.
No worries. Okay, Lauren. So send my regards to Karen, and I will be in touch. And I will send you that article that we have discussed, the article that I found that couldn't read, that long article about narcissism. I will also send it to you and to Karen.
Yeah, well, I will appreciate that because I'd like to read it again.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
and have a good day.
Okay.
All right.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.